Now let's talk about file naming conventions. There are a number of reasons why you really want to make sure you name your files carefully. So firstly, it's easier to find manually. If you are looking through the folders that you carefully constructed with your mental model in mind, you should be able to look in the folder and immediately know which file is which. It's easier to know what a file is for. So you know, is that file in the folder the report that I had to write up, or is it the style guide? It helps with searchability as well, because sometimes you're not the one manually searching for it. Sometimes you're typing it into a search field in your file manager and trying to find the right file. And if you're using strange naming conventions that change arbitrarily, you're going to have a very hard time finding that file in the future. And also it helps with collaboration. If you are doing group projects or you need to share a file with a client, a team member, or a manager, it really helps them to work with you to understand what those files are for and where to find them. So there are several different file naming conventions you can follow with how to type the names up. So there's camel case, which starts with a lowercase letter, and there are no spaces, and every subsequent word is just separated by having a capital letter. Then it can make it easier to understand the file name rather than having it all uppercase or all lowercase, which can lead to confusion. There's also snake case, and that separates each word with an underscore. There's Pascal case, which is like camel case but starts with a capital letter. And there's what we call kebab case, where the words are separated with hyphens. Now, different file naming conventions work in different systems, and some are just traditional for particular areas. So for instance, if you are a JavaScript coder, usually you're writing in camel case. Now generally people advise that snake case is the one that is most friendly to different operating systems. So if you really don't know which one to use, I'd recommend the snake case, where each word is separated with an underscore, but they are all in lowercase. So use short, meaningful titles so that when you're searching for it, you know exactly what that file is for. So an example might be library website prototype. You're building a library website, you have a prototype, that's the name of your file. If you are doing a research report for web design, rather than typing out web design research report, you might decide to use the unit code, but be careful with that. If you're going to search for that in future, I know that I, for instance, often search by the unit code because it distinguishes, one unit from another very easily. But if you haven't studied for a few years, are you going to remember the unit codes that you studied, or are you going to remember the unit names? Avoid unnecessary abbreviations, and this is to the same thing of remembering what the file is called. So you don't want to call something WD Brief 2, Web Design Brief 2. You might not remember that you've called it WD as an abbreviation in years to come, or you might end up with another project like Word document or something like that that also has the same initials, and it will make a lot of difficulties for you searching for it. So make sure it is clear and you're not using abbreviations unless the abbreviations are necessary. Use only alphanumeric characters, and this is mainly to make sure you don't have problems when you are sending files to someone else or you're exporting them for particular purposes. So numbers, fine. Letters, fine. Underscores and hyphens, obviously fine. It's part of file naming conventions, but things like brackets, asterisks, dollar signs, things like that might not be friendly with different file purposes. For that reason as well, I recommend you try to avoid having spaces in names, because if you're going to create assets for websites, they do all sorts of horrible things in the URL. They'll replace the space with the percentage sign 20, and then suddenly everything looks very different once you've got it up online when you're looking in a URL. Now, make sure you include a version number or date. This is one that students often overlook, and it can end up giving you headaches down the line because you shouldn't be working on the same file over and over and over. I do know that you can to some extent do that with Adobe software now, and certainly for instance Microsoft if you're saving to the cloud, because it does have version control where you can go back through it, but usually it's only when you're saving to the cloud, and it can be a bit of a pain going back to different versions and then reinstating those versions. So it's much easier if you regularly save a new copy and give it a version number or date. So what do I mean by that? An example might be your research report. You could put the date on the end. I'll talk about dates more in a minute. Or you could just give a version number. Now, if you're giving a version number, I do recommend you lead with a 0. So don't just put V4, put V04, version 04, because as you make more versions, if you have more than 9, for instance, it's not going to line it up nicely and chronologically anymore. You'll be going 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and then 10, because files order themselves alphabetically, will actually tuck itself under version 1, and you don't want that. So lead with the 0. If you think you're going to have more than 99 versions, lead with 2 zeros, or you can use a date. And if you do that, you will not end up with the typical thing of research report final that inevitably leads to research report final, and so forth. So please do use dates or version numbers instead. Now, when you're creating files that are time-based, so this could be your versions, it could be other things that you were sending like meeting minutes, or if you have to regularly deliver work in progress to a supervisor, make sure you name them so that they order themselves chronologically in your file. Now, usually it will go alphabetically and by number. And so this is a really good system to use. And it's the example that I showed you just before. So at the end of the file, if you're putting the date, the way to do that is standard in computer software is year. So 4 numbers for the year, 2 numbers for the month, and 2 numbers for the day. So you start off big and you get smaller. Why is that? Here's an example. So here we've got a research report from 2025. It's in April, so 04, and it's the 27th of April. And you can see here, 2025, April the 27th. And so as we make new versions of this, we would have 2025 04 29, when we've worked on it on the 29th of April. And then when we come back to it in May, we've got 2025 05 02. And it goes in the chronological order with any normal file system that lists the files, as you can see. Make sure you use short, meaningful titles, avoid unnecessary abbreviations, only use alphanumeric characters, include a version number or date, and keep your files in chronological order if they are time-based. If you want to learn more about file management, then please check out this resource. It's Naming Conventions, Guidelines for Clarity and Consistency by MediaTool.